causes death more than people realize? Serious. Story 1. I'm a florist, so I do funeral flowers. When there's a cold snap, weather is below freezing for 4 or 5 days, there are more funerals for elderly people the weeks after the cold weather. None of them are homeless. This is regular suburban houses with heat on, but somehow the cold still has a drastic effect. Story 2. UTIs. If you know any older people who suddenly show signs of confusion or hostility, check for infection. Especially older women who use Depends or pads regularly. Don't assume it's getting old or dementia. It could be infection due to UTI. It's pretty common, and if it doesn't get treated, it can get ugly. Edit. This also goes for anyone. I have health issues at 47, and I take precautions such as drinking plenty of cranberry juice, cran tabs, or lots of water to flush out my system. It's more common in elderly people due to biological reasons, sitting in Depends, and not enough water to flush system. However, it can sneak up on anyone. If you sit or lay a lot due to work or an illness or aren't getting enough fluids, you could be brewing a UTI. I like the test kits you can get at a drugstore, and then doctors if it's positive for antibiotics. Story 3. I worked at a funeral home for a year. Here are some patterns I observed. If they passed in their 70s and later, it's from Alzheimer's. If they're in their 60s, it's cancer. If men die in their 40-50s, it's from heart disease. If a woman dies in her 40-50s, it's breast cancer. Men in their 20-30s, it's meth and or alcohol related. Women in their 20s, it's alcohol related. For adolescent boys, it's a gun. Additional fun facts. You're most likely to die within a month before or after your birthday or on Christmas. The bigger the storm outside, the more people are dying from disease inside. Our funeral home had a cabinet full of cremated remains that no one ever picked up. Some had been in there for more than 60 years. Legally, the funeral home cannot dispose of them without family permission, so they remain there, waiting. Edits. Somehow forgot about the prevalence of Alzheimer's, which is shocking for how common it is in my own family. And I added another age group. Story 4. Seriously? Being a woman with complaints of anything. For example, if a woman and a man both see a doctor with complaints of chest pain, the man is more likely going to get a cardiac workup. The woman is more likely to get counseled and put on medication for heartburn or anxiety. Story 5. Car accidents. It is the most dangerous thing people do on a regular basis. We could save thousands of lives a year by creating a less car-dependent society in the U.S. Story 6. As someone who works in a hospital, Tylenol acetaminophen. If it was a medication created today, it would be prescription because of how dangerous it can be if you take more than the bottle recommends. If you take way too much and don't get your stomach pumped immediately, within 10 hours of ingestion, there's nothing anyone can do. I'm not exaggerating. I've personally known at least one case that ended in death, and it was a minor. It is not a good way to die. Story 8. As someone who keeps snakes and tarantulas, dogs. People always act like my pets are death incarnate when they're far more likely to be killed by Fido than my scared of his own food, ball python. Story 9. Stairs. Yep, even here in the US, 20x more people every year die falling down a flight of stairs than by semi-automatic rifles of all kinds and manufacturers combined. Story 10. Vending machines. They're sneaky. They killed 37 people from 1978 to 1995. Story 11. Too much sun exposure. 1. It leads to skin cancer. 2. Intensive sun exposure leads, in some hard cases, to a sudden death. People in Chile, Peru, and Bolivia are affected a lot by this. Story 12. Y'all making me uber paranoid. Gonna sit in my recliner with jugs of water and Moosak on my iPod and avoid all animals, insects, vehicles, elevations, and the opposite. Story 13. Deer. People don't realize it, but statistically in America, you are vastly more likely to be killed in a deer-related incident than any other animal. Step aside, bears, gators, dogs, and sharks. Story 14. Fucking around and finding out. Not kidding. Never assume someone won't choose violence. You never know when some guy is in the middle of a brutal divorce, been cheated on, losing his kids and his home, and has decided that you being A to them was the last indignity they would suffer without retribution, for example. Story 15. Shunning. I've seen several friends end their lives because they grew up in a cult and got shunned when they got kicked out or left. Lost all their family and friends. Ended it in desperation. It's a silent epidemic that can be traced back to the cult but never does. The reason will be suicide. Not shunning, people just don't know. Story 16. Poor oral hygiene. If your teeth are an infected mess, that infection has a direct highway to your heart. Your heart can become infected slowly or quickly, and you'll end up on machines until you die. Take care of your teeth. Story 17. Depression is the start of a lot of physical illness. People might overeat or stay in bed all day when depressed, which then leads to weight gain, which leads to high blood pressure, diabetes, and heart disease. Story 18. Fossil fuels result in about 20% of all deaths globally. That's 1,000 deaths per hour. Also cars. In the US, about 42,000 people die from cars yearly, nearly as many as guns. And another 60,000 die from cars' pollution yearly, large part of which are from the fossil fuels they use. Story 19. My cousin recently died because an insect bit his foot. It became swollen but no issues at all. The X-ray shows that nothing's wrong. Yep, a week later he had a fever due to infection and unable to move. Went to ICU, had 3 cardiac arrests. The 4th one he was not able to be saved. That infection led to sepsis. The insect that bit him made a wound and caused some infections. Then that progressed to his internal organs. Story 20. ADHD. We have a higher mortality rate due to careless mistakes, distractibility, clumsiness, reckless dopamine-seeking behaviors, impulsivity, self-medicating with alcohol, drugs, because we feel something is wrong with us, full-blown addiction, self-medicating with cigarettes, higher instances of car accidents, work injuries, falls, broken bones, and our working memory deficits making us more vulnerable to gaslighting, abuse, manipulation. Story 21. COVID. And that's a good answer because I scrolled for so long and nobody said it. Both death from infection and from long-term effects. And if you think otherwise, you're just playing yourself. Story 22. Home pools. Not the highest death count, guns and disease being higher, but most people do not realize exactly the risk of drowning they will experience. My coworker had to perform CPR for drownings twice in 1 year, and that is only anecdotal evidence. Story 23. Lack of sleep. Not directly, but the impact of sleep deprivation on multiple aspects of health, both physical and mental, higher likelihood of developing health concerns, existing conditions worsening, and daily life, falling asleep behind the wheel, etc. We underestimate the importance of sleep. Story 24. I have a terrible fear of walk-in refrigerators and freezers. I've helped out at places that have had them, and I won't go in one unless I know someone is nearby in the kitchen, and even then I'm afraid of closing the door fully behind me. I know people say there is a release inside, but I am still so nervous about those. Story 25. COVID. Yes, there are still of people dying from acute disease every week in the US. You don't have to have a serious bad case of COVID to end up with long-term problems. Did you know that 40% of COVID cases are asymptomatic? Maybe the acute symptoms don't worry you anymore. Maybe you think it's just like the seasonal flu. While it's true that fewer people are dying than in early 2020, the scarier part is actually long COVID. 15% of COVID cases go on to get long COVID. That 15% stacks up every time you get COVID, whether you're symptomatic or asymptomatic. Long COVID can totally ruin your life because it can damage not just your lungs, but also every system of the body, including symptoms of brain fog and memory trouble, heart palpitations and POTS dysautonomia, poor hearing, deteriorating vision, even IBS GI trouble. It's also linked to increased depression and a sharp rise in cancer in younger people. It can manifest like ME/CFS, which can limit your body's energy production so severely that you could not be able to work or take care of yourself. Long COVID can sometimes resolve over time, but it can also cause permanent damage. The best thing you could do if you get sick is to test preferably a sequence of tests over 3 to 4 days because the rapid tests are terrible at detecting current strains of COVID. Also, please rest. There's a big correlation between people who pushed hard and got right back into the gym and then found themselves in a massive symptom flare-up or fatigue crash out. If you have stopped wearing a mask, consider wearing one again, particularly in crowded indoor places like airports, airplanes, grocery stores, doctors' offices, churches, or concerts. At the very least, please don't be at people who choose to wear masks. We're just trying not to get sicker, or we're protecting vulnerable loved ones. Story 26. One of the biggest comorbidities in the Western world is Alzheimer's disease. It's things like forgetting to take life-saving medications, forgetting to turn on an oxygen tank, forgetting the stove is on, and burning down your house. Or it causing your body to just break down and murder you. Story 27. Garden hose. When you trip and hit your head on a brick, they don't blame the brick. I looked through the actuarial tables one year and found some good ones. Dishwashers, door open, and knives pointed up. Misadventure in surgery. The doctor was adventuring. Twisted to death. I can only think this happens in a bar where the big drunk guy says, "I'm gonna twist you to death," and you are too busy laughing to get away. Mostly it's cars. Story 28. Stress suppresses your immune response, the part that makes you feel sick. The illness infection is still there, attacking your body and eating away at you. A lot of people who can work harder and not get sick are just accumulating permanent damage until something finally stops them in their tracks. Story 29. Waking up in the morning to an alarm. The stress of the morning alarm coinciding with a spike in someone's blood pressure due to, say, medical reasons or BP control medications wearing off can lead to cardiac events. Story 30. Cured meats. There's a lot of back and forth about what foods are good for you, what foods aren't, moderation, etc. But the one thing that is time and time again shown to increase cardiac disease risk by study after study, it's cured meats. And it's overwhelmingly likely that it's not the meat or the fat, but the nitrates and nitrites. Story 31. I'm a farmer and consider myself a bit of a bushman. Dirty water. No matter how thirsty you are, never drink it. Your death will be agonizing and messy, and because the bacteria organisms that breed in dirty water, you'll likely be incredibly confused and frightened. Story 32. They say every creature on this planet has a purpose. As far as I can tell, the only possibility for mosquitoes is human population control. They kill millions worldwide each year. Sure can't see any other reason for them. Story 33. I work at an assisted living facility and have become accustomed to dealing with hospice residents. Falls are insanely common and contribute to a lot of health degradations that eventually lead to a resident being put on hospice. When I first started, a lady had a fall while using her walker. She was able to get around just fine, but the walker got caught on a threshold and she fell backwards. We eventually found out it caused a fracture, and she was in immense pain. She went from being an active lady who loved blasting classic rock from her room to being a shaky mess who kept yelling "help" randomly throughout the day and night. They put her on hospice because she wasn't eating. Normally, you need a terminal diagnosis, which she didn't have, so there were talks of potentially graduating her from hospice. But she kept on falling out of her bed when she became agitated. Literally 3-5 falls a day. She just passed away about a week ago. We've had an average of 1 death a month here, and 90% of them are related to falls while they're either on hospice or falls that lead to being put on hospice. Story 34. Wearing tight, pointy shoes. I think many people might know, notice that it can make the feet toes deformed. I think few people realize that this can affect our whole posture, lead to ankle, knee, and hip issues, but also greatly impact our balance. Especially as we get older, balance can become about life or death. An old person can die from a fall or from the implications following a fall. If an old person breaks their leg, hip, or even just twist their ankle, that can affect their whole lifestyle. If they get passive sedative, even just for a few weeks, there is a risk that they may never recover fully from this, which can lead to a further more sedative lifestyle, which can greatly implicate their overall health, which can eventually lead to dying earlier. It will also greatly affect the quality of their remaining life. To be or not to be able to get off the toilet by yourself. The shape of the toes are very important for balance, especially the big toe. If it is bent to be growing towards the other toes, the risk of falling is much higher, as it decreases stability. Take care of your feet and toes. Take care of your leg strength and stability. When you reach a certain age, one fall can be the point of no return. Story 35. The majority of gun-related deaths are suicides. People, at least in the States, often think about mass shootings or other homicides when they think about gun deaths. and a lot of talk about gun control centers around that, but I think we need to talk a lot more about policies that would prevent people from taking their own lives. Story 36, diarrhea. It sounds funny, but 7 mil ppl a year die from it. It's estimated that 17 million people died from diarrheal diseases in 2021. It's dangerous AF in survival situations too, since it can dehydrate you fast AF. Story 37. Not getting enough sleep. Chronic sleep deprivation is really a silent killer. People think they can hustle hard and get by on 4 or 5 HRs of sleep, and then pow, all breaks loose. Story 38. Chronic stress, I think. It's linked to heart disease, stroke, high blood pressure, and even a weakened immune system. People underestimate how much long-term stress can silently erode their health over time. Don't stress much. Story 39. Untreated mental illness. I get that we're all familiar with suicide or people who are so mentally ill that they're unable to care for themselves. But in general, untreated mental illness, depression specifically, although I'm sure this extends further than that, predisposes you to poorer health outcomes across a variety of common chronic conditions. Story 40. Not minding your limits. I'm mainly talking about emotional, psychological, but this applies to physical too, especially in the case of alcoholism. People need to pay attention to how much of a stress or poison they can tolerate, and take measures to ensure they won't cross a certain line. But they don't. So you have people staying in abusive situations and also going out and driving while being intoxicated. Story 41. Cattle. Those animals are huge and can do some serious damage. My friend's husband is a vet, and while he was trying to give a cow a shot, she pinned him to the fence. He was absolutely crushed between her body and broke nearly every one of his ribs and crushed his pelvis while breaking one of his legs. The cow wasn't angry or scared, she just stepped sideways and all her weight trapped him. Story 42. Lack of sleep. I have epilepsy. One night I forgot to keep track of the time. I only slept 3 hours. I was having clusters of my worst type of focal aware seizure, and it led into a situation where I struggled to breathe. Lack of sleep negatively affects our cognitive functioning. I'm sure it has caused car accidents amongst other things. Story 43. A broken heart. Especially after a couple has been married for a long time or anyone in a serious relationship, once their person passes away, people have died from broken heart syndrome. Story 44. Being run over by your own car. It's why you shouldn't try to stop a moving car, no matter how slow you think it's going. This happened to my mom. Luckily, she survived. Our house was on a hill with a steep enough driveway. One day, she was going to go to the store, was in the car, lit her cigarette, and put the car in reverse. She dropped her cigarette between the seat and the door, so she put the car in park and got out of the car to look for her lit cigarette. Well, the car wasn't in park, and the car started rolling down the hill, and she tried to get back in the car to stop it. Ended up getting dragged under the car and got herself run over. Both legs, severe damage to both, spent months in the hospital, and had to have multiple surgeries to repair the worst of the damage. While in the hospital, one of the surgeons came in to talk to us about wound care and whatnot, and when he saw the cause, my mom said, "Probably not something you see very often, huh?" And the doctor responded with, "Oh, we see this all the time." Unfortunately, it usually just doesn't end with the person surviving, because they run over their head. So yeah, I guess don't try to stop moving cars. Story 45. Seizures. I have epilepsy and it's my worst fear. I've obviously never died, but wake up so confused and don't who I am, and it's the scariest, most horrible feeling in the entire world. My worst fear. I think about it constantly. Story 46. Coral. Friend scratched his leg on coral while snorkeling in Fiji. Got some sort of flesh-eating illness and half the muscle in his leg had to be cut out. He was lucky he caught it early before it spread to the rest of his body. Story 47. Antibiotic-resistant infections. A lot of people don't realize how many deaths are caused by infections that no longer respond to treatment. According to the WHO, millions of people die every year due to drug-resistant bacteria, and the problem keeps growing because of the overuse and misuse of antibiotics. It's a silent crisis that could get much worse if we don't address it. Story 48. Former paramedic. The fucking bathroom. Particularly straining to in a slippery shower. Not a national statistic by any means, but my personal experience has shown more people died by something in the bathroom than car crashes. Story 49. Childhood trauma. If you have a high ACE score, you are significantly more likely to have a wide variety of cancers, heart problems, chronic illnesses, etc. Story 50 Ladders. In 2020, there were 161 fatal work injuries caused by ladders in the U.S., with 105 involving movable ladders and 5 involving fixed ladders. Annually, ladder falls result in approximately 300 deaths nationwide. Over the last decade, 43% of fatal falls involved ladders. The construction industry has the highest rates of ladder-related fatalities and injuries, with head injuries being a leading cause of death. Sources: fatal injuries from ladders down in 2020, non-fatal ladder injuries. HTM 2. Ladder fall injury. Statistics: Greenberg and Ruby, 3. Ladder safety. USA. For ICR4s. Falls from height. A retrospective analysis, PMC, PubMed. Central, VAR-PAIS. Falls are the #1 cause of workplace fatalities in the accidental adult deaths involving ladders, a forensic perspective. Falls from ladders. Age matters more than height. PMC, 8. Age and gender distributions of individuals treated for ladder-related. Here is what you need to know to stay safe when working with ladders.